Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk. How are you? You got put out of elementary school because you were pretty bad.
Straight Talk, politics,
Equal employment opportunity commission.
race.
She's a dark-skinned girl.
Straight Talk, money matters, international news.
Let's talk about colonialism.
Straight Talk, celebrity interviews, sports. Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Lloyd Geit. Today's discussion, the mythical nation of ancient Mali and what West Africans have contributed to the world. My guest is Dr. Kevin MacDonald. He is the chair of African archaeology at University College of London. I'd like to thank you for joining us on Straight Talk. First of all, how are you?
Very pleased to be here. I'm feeling very well. Happy to be on the show.
Good. You have been working in Mali since 1989.
That's correct.
Why this desire or love to work in Mali?
Mali has running through it the Niger River, which is, I think, to African civilization in the West, what the Nile is in the East. And, you know, there's an old archaeological chestnut that for every ton of soil dug along the Nile, only a teaspoon has been lifted along the Niger. The Niger is the host of a number of ancient African civilizations which have received far too little research funding, understanding, and also dissemination into the wider world in terms of their achievements and their antiquity.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think those things have been ignored?
To some extent, it's the magnet of Egypt. For example, in Britain, every year we have African History Month. And most years on the posters for African History Month, there are images from ancient Egypt. There aren't images from West Africa. There aren't images from Ife. There's not a Gene terracotta. There are various pharaonic images. So it's a fixation on Egypt to the detriment of our understanding of West Africa, which deserves just as much as attention and also as much African pride, really, as Egypt does.
Let's explain why it deserves to be placed high up in terms of civilizations.
Okay, well, most people don't know that outside of Egypt, the earliest civilizations in Africa began in West Africa, in what is now the area occupied by the modern republics of Mali and Mauritania. The earliest civilization in the West was that of Dar-Tichit, which began around 1900 BC, so contemporary with Kerma in Nubia. And this was a civilization of farmers and pastoralists who had large stone-built settlements, some of these up to about 96 hectares in size, that would have had many thousands of people living in them, with stone monuments and tumuli, and who would have conducted trade right across the Sahara in various types of semi-precious stones like carnelian and amazonite, and also trade in stones which were used for making things like axes and arrowheads. It is, in a sense, this was kind of a Neolithic culture, but it technologically is very similar to things like Kerma. It's on the same sort of scale as Kerma, but it's happening in the West. And that's just step one. You know, we go on from that to step two. You begin to get into the origins of iron metallurgy. That's also very early in West Africa, at least 800 BC, the origins of which are still very poorly understood. And at that same time, you have, for example, in central to north Nigeria, you have the Nok culture coming into existence with all of its very impressive artwork and the early Nok towns, which again are very poorly understood. And you also have the very beginnings of urbanism along the middle Niger, near the inland Niger Delta, in the center of what's now Mali.
It's also what you call complex societies. Explain complex societies to me.
Well, there are different sorts of complex societies. You know, in the easiest sense, you have say some people who might own the land and other people who don't own the land, or some people who might own the cattle herds and other people who don't own the cattle herds. There are all sorts of different steps of hierarchy. But complexity isn't just hierarchy. It's not just the king, his soldiers, and his slaves. Complexity in Africa can take on a different sort of form that we refer to as heterarchy. This is where you have many different complex groups, in a sense, sharing or jockeying for power. Mm-hmm. In a sense, it's almost a bit like, you know, different lobbying groups today. You could have people who control the spiritual power of the land, the earth priests. You could have the people who have the ability to transform the elements, the metallurgists. You could have the people who control the cattle herds. You could have the people who know how to work leather. And all of these people have a certain say or power, which then is negotiated, and you have a ruler who is in a sense a first among equals, who isn't necessarily someone who is ruling by force, but is ruling by consent. Of course, over time, this changes. You know, you do have hierarchical systems, coercive systems come into existence in West Africa, but the nature of complexity in West Africa is very different from how complexity grew, say, in Asia or Europe, or at least perhaps our understanding of it is. But one thing which I've found working even on the histories of pre-colonial states in Africa is just how different their modes of political organization were. All feature different elements. You know, in some places you have elements of divine kingship, in other places you don't. In some places you have slavery as an important part of the socioeconomic system, in other places you don't. And the anthropologist Nicholas David, who worked in northern Cameroon, he said that, you know, Africa is the Burgess Shale of political complexity. There's so much diversity.
We're going to discuss Mali further, but we're going to take a break. Do not go away. We will be back with Straight Talk after these messages.
Straight Talk.
Hungry?
Yeah.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
All right, guys, we gotta be smarter about what we bite on, okay? I want everyone to go outside. We're gonna run Red Rover on 3.
What about you, Tony?
I'm gonna run around in circles, flap my arms, and make engine noises like this.
When it comes to playing, we kids are the pros.
We're eating right, too.
We fuel up.
To play 60!
Your school doesn't have a program? Be a leader. Start one.
Click today and join the movement.
Talking to your kids about finishing school isn't easy, just necessary. Go to boostup.org for materials that can help.
In 1977, an 8-year-old boy picked up the game of golf from his father. The odds of that same boy winning the US Open twice, 1 in 1.2 billion. The odds of him having a child diagnosed with autism, 1 in 110. Ernie Els encourages you to learn the signs of autism.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Lloyd Geit. We're talking about ancient Mali, which is in West Africa. My guest is Dr. Kevin MacDonald. Let's talk about how powerful Mali became. Now, I know you said it wasn't always Mali. It just kind of grew out of other things, then became Mali, and then became powerful. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Right. Well, Mali is part of a continuum of statehood in this part of Africa that goes back to an earlier empire known as Ghana, although it has nothing to do with the
present-day
state.
Ghana, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ghana just chose that name because it was a great ancient kingdom or empire. And locally, to the people itself, it was known as Ouagadougou. And this was West Africa's first textually attested state, as written about by Arab geographers in as early as the 9th century. So Mali grows out of a line of states. You know, first there's Ghana, and then Ghana is replaced by this short-lived state known as Soso. And Mali is essentially a sort of dominated zone of Soso. Soso, the leadership of Soso are probably Soninke peoples, Mande peoples. The people of Mali are now known as Malinke, and they're also Mande peoples, but they were under the domination of Soso. So they rose up against this oppression, and after fighting a series of military battles, and in the epics, sorceress struggles as well, they grow to take over the former lands of Soso, but then to go much farther. And this is because of good leadership and a great deal of energy and organization. But they wind up spreading all the way to the Atlantic, where they had a sort of sub-kingdom known as Gabu and what is now Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and then all the way to the Niger Bend on the other side to Gao.
But something else they had that was very important, gold.
Yes, Mali today, the modern Republic of Mali, is the third largest source of gold in Africa after South Africa and Ghana. And the trade in gold across the Sahara goes back to the 300s AD, because it's at this time that the Carthage Mint begins for the first time to start striking gold coins. And subsequently, after the fall of Byzantine Carthage, with the coming of the Arabic empires to North Africa, the same level of coinage just kept up. They basically just took their place in the trans-Saharan trade that previously that Byzantine Carthage had had. And of course the question is, you know, who is supplying all this gold? Who's orchestrating not only the mining of the gold, but the turning of the gold into some sort of form where it can be transported across the desert? And of course, initially this was Ghana Ouagadougou, most probably, or some predecessor of Ghana Ouagadougou. But ultimately, the polity that really came to control this trade was Mali. And there were two sort of conduits of trade in gold across the Sahara. One was leaving closer to what would be the inland Niger Delta area and up through Kumbi Saleh and Teig Daoust and across into Morocco. And the other was going more from Gao up to what would be Tunisia. Mali came to dominate both of those conduits. They came to control the entirety, really, of the African gold trade to the north.
And what they did is they had reinvested a lot of that money in the structure of Mali itself. And Timbuktu, we hear a lot of mythical kinds of things about Timbuktu and the universities there. Let's talk a little bit about that and how that really did come about because of all the monies from the gold.
Yes. Timbuktu started out really as just a pastoral camp. And this is at least what the Tariq Sudan tells us, that it was in the 1100s that Timbuktu started as just a seasonal camp for Tuareg pastoralists. But over time, it became an area for trade. And by the time that the Empire of Mali arrived there at the end of the 13th century, it had become an alternative conduit towards the north for the gold trade. It wasn't, you know, Timbuktu really wasn't Timbuktu of any importance until it became a trade outpost for Mali. Timbuktu's gone through a whole number of transformations. It's a multi-ethnic city. It starts out as sort of Tuareg and Songhai, and then the Malinke arrive and it becomes a trading post for Mali, And so then you have, three big ethnicities playing for the town, and then ultimately, when Mali began to collapse, when a sort of fight back against Mali began out of Gao by the Songhai people, Timbuktu then becomes a major center for Songhai. So this is in the 1500s. And that's when Timbuktu's role also begins to change from what had been a point of trade and also a point of, a sort of an Islamic holy city, to becoming a seat of learning for Islam.
We're going to take another break, but do not go away. We will be back with Straight Talk. Stay with us.
Straight Talk.
Turning a 20-foot wall into a canvas takes vision. So will getting into college. I've got what it takes. So do you.
So, what's it gonna be? We could ride bikes, skating, movies, zoo, whatever you guys want to do.
Can we just do this?
Yeah. We could just do this.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Hey, I'm Demi Lovato. Bullying is never okay. But what are you gonna do? Well, here's an idea. Go to teensagainstbullying.org. The end of bullying begins with you. So join the movement.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. We're talking about the legendary and unique place of Mali, which is in West Africa. My special guest is Dr. Kevin MacDonald. Let's talk a little bit. We were talking about Timbuktu and how important it was, but let's talk a little bit about the rise and the fall. What made Mali fall?
Ultimately, it was sort of a question, to an extent, of the problem which happens with any empire, is ultimately an empire is composed of many different peoples. And there are dominant peoples. In this case, it would be the Malinke people. And then there are various people who are subservient. And eventually, there's dissension between groups. And one group rises up and begins to try to seize local control. This happened with the Songhai, who were non-Mande people. They speak an Nilo-Saharan language, and their ancestral homeland is more or less the area between, say, Gao in Mali and Niamey in Niger. And they began to fight back against Mali and Malian dominance in the 1400s. And they launched, over time, 3 major military campaigns. After having solidified their position around Gao, 3 major military campaigns against the Empire of Mali, beginning in 1470, where each campaign would penetrate farther into Malian territory. They would ultimately sack the then capital of Mali and reduce the size of Mali and claim all the trade entrepôts that Mali had seized over time to control the Saharan gold trade.
If you had to give me 3, 4, 5 things that Mali contributed to the world, what would those things be?
Well, I mean, one of them would be the classic literature, or the epic of Sunjata, which has probably been translated into most major languages now and has been in print in one form or another since the 1960s. There are about, I think there are precisely 47 published versions of the epic right now, all of them slightly different. And I know Penguin Classics has Sunjata out, for example. And it also, in a sense, in that Sunjata means, in a sense, the Lion King. It also is part of Walt Disney's The Lion King. And so this oral literature, which comes about, is part of the Malian heritage.
Because a lot of that was important. That's how they communicated, through the, is it griots?
The griots.
Griots.
Yeah, the griots are essentially the bards of the Mande world, and they have these great mnemonic systems to remember extremely long texts accurately. And oftentimes this is because you'll find if you listen to a griotic performance, a lot of numbers will be used, and they use these numbers to unpack the story that they're telling. And a griot can sit down and give a performance that will last a whole day long.
Wow, that's a lot.
And accompany that with music. Example, you're going to start out. You're going to maybe speak for a half an hour about one aspect, one chapter of the epic, and then you're going to have a break, and you're going to essentially do a jam on a two-string guitar or a balafon or something. That will be a musical interlude, and then you'll have another narrative, which might just lope along over a recurring motif on the guitar.
We're going to take another break. We're going to come back and discuss modern-day Mali, which I understand concerns you quite a bit, as it should. Do not go away. We will be back with Straight Talk. Stay with us.
Straight Talk.
When life's this hard, it's no wonder 7,000 students drop out every school day. Visit boostup.org and help kids in your community stay in school.
Nice. Yes, go! Yes! No! Come on! Oops. Yeah, sure. Let's go. Let's go.
Moms everywhere are finding ways to keep kids active and healthy.
Works every time.
Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov.
Did you know that getting up and getting active for just 60 minutes a day is all it takes to help you get stronger, look better, and feel great?
Or that fresh fruits and veggies aren't just healthier and crunchier, they can taste better too?
Eating better and getting more active is easier than you think.
Yeah! Keep watching for some fun and easy ways to discover the magic of healthy living in your life.
America.
Let's get healthy together!
Today is Saturday.
60 minutes of physical activity a day and eating well can help get your child healthy. Get ideas. Get involved. Get going at letsmove.gov. That's letsmove.gov.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. We're talking about ancient Mali. Doctor, I really want to get a sense of what current-day Mali is like. There are some real problems there.
Yes, in many ways this follows on from the fall of Gaddafi. I think most people who worked in Mali for a long time saw with the end of the Gaddafi dictatorship in Libya the beginnings of problems for the entire African Sahel, because so much of the elite battalions of Gaddafi were composed of mercenaries who were Tuareg, who were from southern Algeria, northern Mali, northern Niger, and who'd wanted to be separate, to make their own separate state for a long time. And their main source of arms and support had been Gaddafi in the previous civil war, which happened in the early 1990s. So with Gaddafi gone, and with as fine an armaments as they're ever likely to have, and a very highly trained force, which fled Libya, it was inevitable that they were going to strike when they could, because there was going to be no better time. There's no one at their back anymore. They had to take the armaments and make their move, and so they did make their move, and they made their move to start with in Mali, where they've seized the northern half of the country.
And that's not good news for people like you who often do these digs where you find all these important things. That's going to be interrupted, if not destroyed.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's already curtailed me from going out and doing work this past year, and my graduate students in various localities, and also various research projects being undertaken by Malian scholars themselves. Gao and Timbuktu are under occupation, and not just by Tuareg separatists, but by Boko Haram and also ACME, or the Al-Qaeda du Maghreb. So this is also having an active effect on the cultural heritage of these areas, some of which is doesn't meet with the approval of Al-Qaeda, particularly things to do with the Sufi aspect of Islam, and Sufi shrines are being destroyed.
And on top of that, the encroaching Sahara Desert.
Mm-hmm.
That too is cause for concern.
Well, this is a double disaster, because the ability, these areas, particularly in the north, areas north of the Niger, are very dependent, as they always have been, on active trade with the exterior or with the south. At the moment, nobody wants to send food trucks up from the south because they'd just be seized, and also trade across the borders is hampered as well. So the sedentary populations of the north are suffering, and which is also why you have a refugee crisis.
Briefly, what's the future based on the things that we've already said about what's happening in Mali?
Well, of course, in the south there's been a coup d'etat led by southern elements who feared that Tuareg presence in the military hierarchy and also that the current government were too soft and too ready to negotiate with separatists in the north. So the south will need to consolidate first, and ultimately, because Mali lacks the military punch, I think, to be able to take back the north without external assistance, really as was the case in Libya ultimately, it's going to be down to the European powers and also to America as to whether there's going to be any intervention to keep Mali whole and entire, or whether Mali will simply be allowed to be split into two. But the tragic element of this is Timbuktu and Gao will go, if there was a split, to the independent Tuareg state, but yet the majority of the populations of Timbuktu and Gao are not Tuareg, they're Songhai.
Not a good-looking situation right about now.
No.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us on Straight Talk. We have been talking about ancient Mali, and our guest has been Dr. Kevin MacDonald. He is, of course, the chair of the African Archaeology at University College of London. Not of London, but London. We want to thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week with yet another exciting show. Have a good one.
Straight Talk with award-winning journalist Lloyd Geit.
Thank you so much for joining us on Straight Talk. How are you?